We'll start with saying welcome all to the Brewers of South Suburbia special event with Sierra Nevada here. Boss is dedicated to the art of crafting and quaffing fine beers through the sharing of ideas and experiences, the advocacy of brewing as a hobby, and the responsible consumption of beverages containing alcohol. And in celebration of our 31st year as a registered homebrewing club, in addition to all of our Boss members that are here today, we welcome other brewers and brewery clubs from around the area, such as UKG, Chaos, Club Ward, and the Joliet Brewers Guild, as well as anyone else that was able to join us here today. A while back, I reached out to Dr. Charlie Bamforth here to ask about a Q&A for our club, and he graciously agreed, allowing the club to pick his brain about all things beer for a little over 2 hours on a random Friday night. And during that meeting, he spoke almost in reverence of Sierra Nevada and how they operate as an organization, planting the seeds, for me at least, for tonight's event. I want to thank Charlie for allowing Boss that time, and our introduction to Terence Sullivan as well, who is the product manager and brand ambassador here for Sierra Nevada, as well as eventually Ken Grossman here when he arrives. For some general housekeeping items just before we begin, if you have any questions during the presentation, please submit it through the chat bar below. We will be working these questions into the discussion as they fit, and we apologize in advance if we don't get to your questions, but we'll be referencing back and forth pretty regularly. Should be old pros on Zoom by now, I would think. We've had enough experience with it, but along the bottom, just below the videos here, you should see a feature that says chat. And if you click on that, you'll see that you can type to individual people or to everyone and anyone here that's on the call today. So just drop in a note there. You should see a note pop up, and that's pretty much how it works, right? So if you have any questions, that's the best place to put them, and we'll reference those as we go throughout the presentation. The other thing that I want to remind everyone is that this is a cross-country event. We have people from California, we have people here in the Midwest, we have people up in Michigan, and soon to be people in North Carolina here. So we're at the mercy of the internet. Please remain muted during this to preserve bandwidth so that we can all see and hear what's being said from Ken, Terence, and Charlie today. I recommend speaker view personally. So if you go up into the upper right-hand corner here where it says view, if you change it to speaker, you'll be able to see who is talking as we go. So that's probably the best move for us here today. With all of that being said, are you curious to know a little bit more? Are you curious to know a little bit about Sierra Nevada and what they're doing and what they've been up to? I want to take a moment to watch a brief video here. Let me admit everyone else. And want to take a brief moment to watch a video here from Sierra Nevada to introduce this and kick this thing off.
I remember my first day trying to sell beer in Chico. Probably 90% of them or more hated it. But the 10% who loved it, loved it.
It starts with a spark. For some, it's a guitar or a camera, a click of a bike, your first ghost pepper, or a midnight tinkering session in the garage. For some, curiosity is a chase. To turn down the steady job to start that brewery, and to listen to your wife when she says, I think you gotta follow your passion. To drive up and down the coast of California to find a pile of old dairy equipment and see in it a dream. To brew what you love, even if it's not for everyone. To work nights, weekends to seemingly no end until you finally get it just right. To grow. More fermenters, more beer, more people who are as crazy as you are. To give the big corporate brewer the bird when they come knocking. If they want to buy Sierra Nevada, they can get it from the store like everyone else. To brew sustainably, to build the nation's first LEED Platinum production brewery and reuse almost every tree. To the tinkerers, thinkers, guitar pickers, wave writers, all-night writers, garage inventors, and downhill junkies. That's who we brew for those who work hard, live like crazy, and fill their cup with curiosity after a day well done. You bring your passion, we'll bring ours. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. Spark your curiosity.
That's the first I've seen that completed.
There's a couple of nice shots of you in that there, Terry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got your best aspect as well.
Yeah, right. My back end.
Yeah. It's all pre-beard, too, from the look of it.
Yes.
Hello. Yes, I did join.
Hey, all right. All right. So that being said, let me get back to the speech. I hope everybody liked that video. We'll be splicing it into the final master here. So if it was a little choppy, bear with us. We'll get that going. So let's all open our first beer. We're going to start with the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, if you haven't already. And we're going to start with a toast. Oh, see, and my background's not letting me do it. There we go. There's the glass, right? All right, so everybody's got their glass. We'll roll with it. Here we go. So a toast. Raise a glass in praise of beer. With our hosts at Sierra Nevada, and allow me to introduce you to our speakers today, Ken Grossman, Terence Sullivan, and Dr. Charlie Bamforth of Sierra Nevada. Guys, true pleasure to have you guys on today. Really appreciate the time, the effort, and all of the emails and correspondence that has gone into making today a reality. Thank you so much, all three of you.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
So, and where is everybody coming in from today here? I know Ken had said he was coming in from North Carolina. What about you?
I'm in Chico, a couple miles from the brewery, and I know where Charlie is, but I'll let him tell you.
I'm in Davis. I'm about to fly to England for a little while. But, so.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you'd be back overseas or not across the pond for this call or not. So
No.
timing couldn't be better here at this point. So
And I think Ken's with his grandchildren. Is that right?
Yes, they're with my wife downstairs right now. But, watching videos, that was part of my challenge today. Was I worked all day and my wife was not happy with me. I had to cook dinner and she put the kids down to bed. So
yeah, the fun never stops. That's for sure. I know right before we started here, I was doing something similar. I did the sound check and we had kids railing in the background here. So it was, it's been entertaining to say the least today. So
Mine's 19 years old. He's out with his friends. He's rarely home.
there we go.
that makes you feel old, doesn't it, Terence?
Yes, it does, Ken. Yes, it does. Because I remember when your kid was 16. That probably makes you feel old, right?
Yeah, that's true. Terence was his first boss.
Yep.
Well, his first brewery boss. He had a job before that, but
Indeed. So we have quite a few beers on draft tonight for everyone, and we have quite a history of Sierra Nevada here to go through, as well as the man that started it all here. So guys, where do you want to begin? Where do you want to start? You want to start with the history? You want to talk about Paleo? What do you want to do?
I think Ken should tell a little history and weave Pale Ale in there. That's where it all started, right?
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, so I started out as a hobbyist home brewer in Southern California at a fairly young age, and continued to make homebrew when I moved to Chico in 1972, and then a few years later opened a homebrew supply store when it was a fairly novel thing to do, to brew your own beer. So I imported malts and hops and taught people how to make beer in 5-gallon buckets. And thankfully we had UC Davis down the road, and I spent quite a bit of time at UC Davis studying brewing, and decided to open a commercial brewery in 1978, and sold my homebrew shop and started to learn how to weld and do refrigeration and all the things it took back then to build all the equipment. And made my first batch of commercial beer in November 1980, based on a recipe we had been perfecting as home brewers for a number of years, and went from 5 gallons to 10 barrels. From 10 barrels, we actually brewed our last years on a 10-barrel brew house, which I cranked out almost 18 barrels, and made a little over 10,000 barrels of beer in our original plant, and then built the first facility on 20th Street with the capacity to make 60,000 barrels a year. Rapidly outgrew that, and then expanded into our current facility in Chico about 10 years later. Continued to grow there, and then eventually built the second in North Carolina. And sort of the quick history, that's where we started, and we sort of grew with the craft brewing revolution. We were one of the very first small brewers to open, and we're, I guess, the last surviving of that first era of small brewers that opened between 1977 and 1981. Back in that time, there was roughly about 40 breweries in the whole U.S. That included the biggest and the littlest. So quite a different time than we're living through today, with more than 8,000 breweries in existence.
I think
There's
your
a
first
lot
beer,
in
Ken, was
between that happened during those 40 years, but that's sort of the opening salvo.
I think your first beer was a stout, wasn't it, Ken?
The very first beer I brewed, correct, Charlie, to sort of break in the equipment, was 5 barrels of stout, and then I brewed pale ale about 2 days later. We knew pale ale was going to be our flagship. We didn't think stout was going to be, but we figured brewing a heavy dark beer would hide a lot of the sins that we knew we were going to have making our first batch in equipment that was all brand new and all home built.
I think the other point you always make is that, you know, you had several goes at it before you hit upon what you were satisfied with. Yeah.
Yeah, we dumped almost a dozen batches of beer, and not because they were bad, they just weren't the same. And so beer to beer, we were seeing a lot of variability, and we knew we couldn't go to market and feel good about not being able to produce the same beer. And turned out most of our issues were fairly simple in the end to solve. It was our yeast wasn't happy. We weren't giving it enough oxygen, and it wasn't giving us a consistent fermentation or the ability to serial harvest it batch after batch. And once we realized we needed to crank up the oxygen and figure out how to keep the yeast happier and healthy, then we were able to make very consistent beers.
So this was all off of the stout or off of pale ale at that point?
Was it pale ale?
Pale ale.
Yeah. First brews, every brew house that we've commissioned, the first brew that goes through now as kind of just a ritual is to brew a stout on it. They even did that in North Carolina whenever they fired up the kettle for the first time. It was a stout that went through there, and all of our pilot breweries, even when Ken got his original brew house back from Mad River Brewing Company. The first brew we did down in Berkeley was a stout as well. So.
And so when you were doing that brewing setup, was that was pre-tap room era, right? I mean, so like this was all to cans, this was all distribution into bars. What was that?
Did we lose him?
We might.
I'm wondering if we lost him. Seemed to freeze up there. It was the original brew house was just a what they called a Kwanzaa hut. It was just a little those kind of dome shaped aluminum buildings or whatever they were made out of back then. I think you have a picture in there somewhere. It was just strictly a brew house. They had a little room that they sat in, kind of a break room that consisted of the back seat of the delivery van and a couple kegs to sit on, and that was it. So it wasn't until 1987 when he'd gone to Germany to buy the brew house, used brew house there, and then sat on it for a couple years until he had enough money to buy some property, break some ground, and build the brewery that we are in currently in Chico. And so that was 87, I think, whenever he was first, 87 when he was first started brewing on that. And then he knew he was going to have a little pub. Anyone that's been to Chico, it's expanded since then, but he wanted to have a tasting room. But that came two years later, 1989, was when we opened up the restaurant. So.
And you were right there along for the ride too, weren't you, Terence?
I joined in 94. So a couple years later, I went to UC Davis, studied fermentation science, and Ken had hired someone from UC Davis that had left and gone to Henry Weinhardt's and started working there. And a few years later, I got hired on at Sierra Nevada, and I was the first graveyard brewer that kind of moved all of our production to 24 hours, 7 days a week. It was actually really 6.5 hours a week. 6 days a week, 6.5 days a week. We would shut down at noon on Sunday and then fire back up at 4 a.m. on Mondays. I always tell people I was 26 years old and I was in the prime of my life, and it was a pretty amazing experience because they had me on graveyard shifts on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which means I got off at 4 a.m. on Saturday. I'd go home and sleep for 8 hours, come back and work the noon to 8 o'clock shift, go home at 8 p.m. And sleep for 8 hours and be back at work at 4 a.m. until noon. But I had like 2.5 days off straight, and it was like crazy. That'd probably kill me nowadays, but that was some great fun. I always say I was not only a brewer, I was also the security guard because I locked up the whole brewery at the end of my shift on Sunday nights. So it was or Sunday afternoon.
And you loved every minute of it, Terence.
Oh, I loved it. I did it for about 2.5, 3 years, and it was quite fun. I tell you, working in the beer industry has its rewards and challenges too, but it's definitely great. I mean, it's one thing having a banking job. That's what one of our workers used to always say, oh, you can go be a bank president somewhere else if you're not satisfied here. And I always say, like one of the greatest things is when you get off your shift and you get to go over next door and belly up to the bar and have the fruits of your labor. And it's so rewarding. It's just like, I mean, I know we have some home brewers on here. It's probably the same thing, you have that anticipation of that batch of beer that you made, and you just can't wait to open up that bottle just to see what you get, and same thing. So
Interesting. The first time I met Ken was,
You may have to be
oh, it's fine.
the face today. I'm in a really bad internet zone at my son's house, so
I was just about to tell the story the first time I met you, Ken, when I arrived from England early in 1999, and I went up to the brewery in Chico, and over lunch, I did the sampling the various beers. And of course, coming from England, you know, we know about hops, but you know, the level of hopping wasn't anywhere near as significant as it was in Sierra Nevada. And I said, you know, Ken, your beers are about as hoppy as I can take them. And I think his exact words were, you know, 25 years ago, I was brewing in a bucket. Now I'm brewing hundreds of thousands of barrels every year. Do you think I should leave it alone? I said, yeah, go for it, Ken, you'll be okay. And now, you know, there's two more beers we're going to taste today that are even hoppier than they were in those days. And I love them. And that's what I'm looking for. So, yeah, remarkable.
Yeah, Charlie, that was one of the stories that you happened to share with us when we did our gathering.
I'm sorry. I'll try and find some new ones then.
No. I'm glad you brought it up because it's one of those things to talk about kind of with the group here, like an evolution of how hoppy things have become over time, where I've actually heard that said at like competitions where, you know, like pale ale here, to bring it full circle here, pale ale is considered quaint by a lot of people because of how muted some of the hop character is. But I mean, it's the classic. It's the example of it's the trendsetter. It was the style. And it blows my mind when people are like, oh, well, it's just not what it was. And that cracks me up just to think about, just as, you know, I said, because it started it all.
I'll tell you this. Over the years working at Sierra Nevada, one of the things that, you know, I mean, one of your questions is what drives us, right? You know, and it's, you know, Sierra Nevada's family, Sierra Nevada's quality, Sierra Nevada's consistency, and that's one of the things, you know. So from my very first pale ale to the pale ale I'm having right now is they have not varied much, and the recipe has not changed a lot. I think Ken would probably agree with me that you know, we have a lot more tools that are you know, at our fingertips to kind of make pale ale great every single time. That he, you know, didn't quite have all that equipment back in the day, but your palate is the one thing that really kind of tells the truth. And I always tell people the great one is the one time we entered pale ale, and we still do in GABF, and we won awards early on. We don't win them anymore because everybody dry hops their pale ales. And we entered pale ale in the category, and I got back one judge's sheet, and it said, you might want to consider a different category. It doesn't meet the American Pale Ale category guidelines. And I just think that's, I would love to run into that, know who that judge is, but I can't. But that would be great. I brought a couple beers in here I wanted to show. So we've opened up direct to consumer, and we're making kind of little fun little beers. And so this is actually a beer. Let's see if I can get this in. Hold on.
Yeah, you might have to turn off the background blur. I had the same problem. And now you're on mute.
You see my wife's ironing board in the background. So anyways, but this is a beer that we made called Parking Lot Memories. And it's my memory of my very first pale ale, which was in the parking lot of a Grateful Dead concert. This is my a rendition of my buddy's VW Bug. That's What a Long Strange Trip It's Been. And that's supposed to be me right there, although I never wore coveralls. But anyways, this is double dry hopped because I remember having my very first one, and it was out of the world hoppy, and I still think it's hoppy. But we wanted to double dry hop it just to meet today's standards of what I experienced hop wise. So sorry, I didn't mean to derail that whole thing.
No, that's what this is for. Like it's those side journeys that make this fun. So by all means, you got more of that, bring it on, because we love it.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started sampling people, the same bitterness level it is today. But back then it was a shocking taste for a lot of people who were used to drinking, 12 or 9 or 14 BU beers at the high end. And our bitterness levels haven't changed. People's tastes have certainly adapted to enjoying hops in a way that was unheard of back 40 years ago.
No, absolutely. So let's dive into that recipe a little bit here. Let me share screen and see what we're working with here. So this was the recipe as was shared with me from Terence. Again, thank you for all of this. Everyone should have got.
You didn't share the original handwritten one.
Yeah, no, it's he's got it in his picture log. But
Yep.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say, if there's any homebrewers on here and they're writing everything down, so we as Sierra Nevada brewers, we do our timing backwards. So we count 0 as whenever we first get to a boil. So I had a couple of them that were already laid out that way. So this is just in order of, so 0 minutes is right when you get to a boil, and we're adding hops at that point. We actually add them a little bit before we even get the kettle full and full boil. But 90-minute boil is kind of how that's laid out. So 155 obviously varies throughout the year based off of grain coming in, all those kind of things. We have hydrating mills now. So our mills have a steeping chamber and a crushing chamber, and a lot of times we'll adjust those to meet our projected ending gravity, and adjust those based off of temperature, those kind of things. Some of the, see if you scroll down, everybody knows Chico ale yeast, and we're pretty consistent on most of our ale yeast really likes the 68 degrees fermentation, and we get a nice 6-degree rise on it. But I try to keep all these recipes relatively, or we do, relatively generic, because every homebrew system is just a little bit different, and that's the beauty of homebrewing. Documenting, Ken had his notebook, and he was always documenting all the small little tweaks that he does. My brother's a home brewer, and he never writes anything down, and every once in a while he'll make a great beer, and he has no idea of what he did to actually make that beer. But so
I saw a couple of comments, and Charlie answered on the hydrating mill. So just for actually complete clarity, the original wet mills were different than what the hydrating mills are. There's wet mills back in the earliest version, you would soak the grain for I don't know, a half hour or 60 minutes in a big steep tank above the mill, and you would mill the grain completely saturated and wet. The hydrating mill is a little bit of a variation of that, where the grain gets wet, but it only gets wet for about 60 seconds. And so the theory behind it is the husk gets moist enough that it doesn't shatter, which allows the lautering process to be more effective, because you don't have a completely pulverized husk. And then I think, what was it? There was 2 questions that popped up. The one was on the mill. I don't remember what the one was that came by, but anyway, it's called a steep conditioning mill. So the grain is just briefly wet. It's still dry inside when it's milled. So you're still milling sort of a dry angiosperm, or dry interior of the grain, not the endosperm. One of the advantages is it eliminates the explosion risk of milling dry grain where dust is created. So it's also, less of a hazard from inhalation of the silica from the grain. So there's a couple of benefits, but a big one is the lack of the explosion concerns about milling.
Back in the day at Bass, we used to use steam conditioning, so we didn't.
Right. Yeah. And that's done, actually, I see that fairly often throughout the world. I don't know if it still is, but over the last 30, 40 years, I've seen a lot of breweries that do that. They have an auger right ahead of a dry mill, and they just briefly steam the grain or wet the grain right ahead of a typical dry mill. Same sort of reason, softens the husk just a little bit and keeps the dust down.
I saw one question in here on how similar is 2022 Pale to 82. It's very similar. Since I've been working at Sierra Nevada in '94, we early on, I think we had maybe one other grain. We did. It's always been Cascade hops from day one.
So from day one, it was Cascade hops. Probably the major difference, and it's something that's pretty much out of our control, is barley variety. So we've always used two-row malt in that beer. The varieties we were getting originally from Bauer Schweitzer malting in San Francisco, and then later from Great Western. Bauer Schweitzer was using 100% Clogus, which was growing up in the Tule Valley, northern California. They don't really grow much malting barley there anymore. And it was malted in small drums. And then when they went out of business, I think in 82 or 83, we switched to Great Western malting in Los Angeles. And they were starting to migrate out of Clogus and get into Harrington. And we were not enamored with the complete switch to Harrington, and so we ended up with blends of Clogus, Triumph, Harrington as we sort of moved through the varieties. And that's very common globally, that farmers are looking for grains that are higher yielding, less lodging, and the ability to not lose their husk. And Clogus had a lot of challenges, and as the variety got older, it was more difficult to malt, it was more difficult to grow, it would lodge in the fields, and so it became a not very friendly farmer's barley. So most growers wanted to get out of Clogus, and Harrington was a more efficient grain to grow and a more easily malted barley. And we've since gone through a number of varieties. Harrington, I think, is pretty much gone now. And if you go to Germany, they may change varieties every 1 or 2 or 3 years. Will be a new variety, trying to get higher yields and trying to be easier to malt. And what they did do is breed the dormancy out of the grain as well, meaning back in the olden days, you'd have to store the barley for a while or you came in to get it to Germany out. It was sort of a natural plant protective property where, if it rained in a field at the end of harvest, the grain wouldn't start sprouting. But when the maltster bought the barley, they couldn't start malting it right away. So the maltsters wanted to breed dormancy out of the grain, and that's come back to hurt them sometimes, because now sometimes it does rain right during harvest and the grain will start to sprout and chit in the field, and that creates new problems. So there's pros and cons with having grain that has good dormancy or not.
The other question, Ken, was about using pellets in any recipes or only whole.
Oh, yeah. We do not typically use pellets, certainly not in any of our traditional beers. We do use a lot of new hop products in some of our new beers, Hazy, Little Thing, and a number of other beers where we're using lupulin powder and other things, but we've not typically been a pellet user for any of our beers, and we haven't gone back and changed any of our traditional beers to pellets.
Yeah, the big little thing you'll try that does have what Ken's talking about is the lupulin powder in it. But all our traditional beers, Torpedo is still 100% whole cone, and pale ale, obviously. But anything that's our traditional
Celebration.
Yep, Celebration Ale, 100%. So
I love Celebration. I wish we could have done this in the fall. I would have loved to have had that in the tasting. Truly a love letter to craft beer fans.
my favorite beer.
The lupulin products are basically it's simply the concentrated glands that all the goodness is in. So it really is just amplifying the level of everything, all the resins and the oils. So it's basically a concentrated form of native hop, basically. So it's not been processed in any other sort of eating way.
So I'll answer this other question really quick because I want Ken to dive into the next one after this. But yeast strain that came from Siebel's Institute, picked out by Ken back in the day, and that's what we currently have stored it, and several yeast banks we still currently have it at. We're fortunate. I think the university or Chico State still has some of our but I wanted to get Ken to answer this. What inspired you to make Sierra Nevada Pale Ale?
Well, as a home brewer and a homebrew shop owner, I brewed a lot of different beers and enjoyed a lot of different beers, and we were really sort of looking at the market and acceptance. We actually, some of our earliest test batches pre-Pale Ale were IPAs, and we still have some handwritten recipes of an IPA that we considered bringing to market as one of our first beers, and came to the conclusion that the American palate probably wasn't ready for a 40 or 50 or 60 IBU beer, and we chose a pale ale as sort of a compromise of the styles we loved to drink and enjoy brewing, and thought that we were going to have to charge a premium, which back in 1980, the price we picked was 85 cents a bottle on the shelf. And we sort of worked backwards from 85 cents because that was the highest imported beer at the time, or the typical high-priced imported beer sold for about 85 cents a bottle. We couldn't afford six packs, so we sold individual bottles. And we knew the beer was going to have to be memorable and distinctive to command that high price. Maybe today that's sort of a joke, but back then 85 cents was sort of, we thought was the high end of what a consumer would spend on a beer. And so we wanted to balance the distinctive uniqueness with drinkability. And that's something we still focus on today, is trying to make sure we make drinkable beers, regardless of how hoppy they are. We want to make sure they have a proper amount of malt and other characteristics to balance that hop kick. And so we came upon our pale ale recipe, and we do have all the early, I don't know about all of them, but we have at least a dozen test recipes of trying to perfect pale ale on a homebrew scale. As we were building the brewery in 79 and 80, my partner and I, we would brew once a week, and we would experiment with hop varieties, yeast varieties, and grist, and sort of started to hone in on the pale ale recipe. So I have pale ale 1 through 12, and as I mentioned, there's some IPAs stuck in there as test brews as well on the 5-gallon kit. And as a homebrew shop owner and as a serious brewer back in the late 70s, I had a walk-in cooler that I would have all my fermenters in. I brewed everything. So I was brewing wide ranges of beers with all different hops from around the world. I sort of connected with a lot of both homebrew suppliers as well as commercial hop dealers back in the 70s. And so I was able to buy German hops and English hops and Czech hops and Polish hops and you name it. I had a really great connection for buying these, what were they, 5 kilo vacuum sealed bricks of shredded hops, sort of similar to the lupulin we're using today. I had a guy, somehow he was on the European hop board and we connected. And so I was buying hops out of Europe from him. So I was aware of all these different hop varieties, but when I went to decide to do a commercial beer for the US and do a pale ale, I thought we should really use American hops. And at that time, there weren't a lot of American aroma hops. There were Bullions and Brewer's Gold and Northern Brewer, obviously Cluster, which was almost everything that was being grown, Willamettes, and then Cascade. And Cascade was truly, at that time, a not very well loved hop by the big breweries. It was too, citrusy and piney and didn't really meet the expectations of most Germanic brewmasters, and most big breweries had Germanic brewmasters, and so it never really found favor. And so here was a hop we thought that was distinctive and unique, and we could sort of exploit as our lead hop in our beer.
I think you picked the right one. Just saying.
Yeah, well, it ended up being that, and then Centennial came later, and we use that in celebration, and now the world's way different. And back in that era, there were lots of hops being developed and rejected by the big brewers because they were looking for replacements for Hallertauer and Saaz, and again, most of the brewers were German trained, and some of these new American hops, Cluster was hated as a aromatic hop, and Bullion and Brewer's Gold and Northern Brewer were also just way too extreme. There was one brewer, Ballantyne's, did feature, they had their own hop stills and did feature pretty unique hop aromas in some of their beers. Ballantyne's Ale and even Ballantyne's beer did have some fairly aggressive hop aromas. But at this point, those breweries are gone, maybe because they were before their time as far as featuring those kind of hop characters.
An interesting thought to think about.
I wanted to point out really quick before we do move to Torpedo is that we did mention that in Pale Ale, but that is bottle conditioned, and it's been bottle conditioned since day one. And that was in regards to, well, it was Ken's passion with quality, and he had equipment that couldn't really, it was soda filling on his bottles, and he would get large amounts of oxygen on the bottling line. So the only way to combat that was to add some yeast, add some sugar, and let that soak up that oxygen.
Scavenge the oxygen.
Yep. And so to this day, it's still bottle conditioned, as well as the Bigfoot if we get into that. But anyways, our core old school original brands are all bottle conditioned because it's the only way he can keep them fresh on the shelves. And I'd like to point out too is I think one of the coolest things that a lot of people today don't understand about the challenges that early brewers, not only Ken, but everybody else that kind of started back in those days. And, the dairy equipment, you had to build your own equipment. The only way you could actually sell beer was in bottles, unless you had the money to purchase cooperage. And at that time, when Ken first started, he didn't have the money to buy a bunch of kegs and lean on that aspect. So,
Terence,
go ahead.
Terence, I'll actually add to that not only did we not have the money to purchase cooperage, there was no bars that were really willing to pour all these small brewery brands. I mean, there were just a handful of places that had more than one or two taps. There were no multi-tap outlets other than Irish bars, and they were used to pouring Guinness and maybe one or two other imports, but there wasn't a market, and those kegs sold for $29 a keg. And so as a small brewer, there's no way you could have survived if you were a draft brewer back in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah. So
Terence makes a great point about the yeast in the bottle. Not only is great at scavenging oxygen, of course, these days oxygen levels are far lower than they were back in the day, but also the yeast mops up any stale material which develops. But Sierra Nevada is very, very conscious about flavor stability. The beer is distributed refrigerated. The trucks are refrigerated. There's not many brewers these days that will distribute their beer anywhere in the world in refrigerated containers, and that speaks to the commitment to quality.
And to Charlie's point, so oxygen being bad, back when I first started, you look up the brewing literature from that era, and a good level of oxygen was if you got below 1 milliliter of headspace air. And today, a milliliter headspace air, I don't know what that equates to in parts per billion, but it's thousands, I think. And today, the technologies are such that you strive to be down below 50 or 75 parts per billion. Back then, you were at 50,000 or 10,000 parts per billion, and you were happy with it. So the level of technology of filling equipment was not nearly to the level we are today, and so beers did get cardboardy and stale very, very quickly.
I think we can move into Torpedo, huh?
Yeah, I think a few of us have already been pouring ours. So you had kind of talked about how the IPA recipe kind of developed from the pale ale recipe a little bit, or maybe I misunderstood that as we were talking about it. But you sent me actually some photos today, and I guess I'll show those real quick here before we dig into that. But it's the photos of the hop torpedo. And I thought maybe you could talk about that for a minute. Let me pull that up here.
Want me to cover this, Ken? So the Torpedo is, so it was originally developed as we started to grow as a company, and it kind of was based off of Celebration Ale. As demand for our seasonal beers increased, we needed to produce more Celebration Ale. At that time, we had dish bottom fermenters. Well, we still have them. But that was our only means of dry hopping. And so we had, I think, 11 dry hop tanks. And we would add bags, and we still do to this day, a portion of like Celebration Ale and Bigfoot barley wine. 100% of Bigfoot barley wine is still done the traditional dry hopping way of, same as a home brewer would do. If they're using whole cone hops, they're probably putting it in a little cheesecloth and adding it to the fermenter. We're making big cheesecloth bags and putting them through the manway of the tank and connecting them to the bottom of the tank so they don't float up. And as Celebration Ale expanded and the desire to make more of it, we had to figure out a way to do dry hopping external through the tank, because all of our other fermenters didn't have the capability of adding bags of whole cone hops. So we developed the Torpedo, and this was literally done in the pub. So great things happen in the pub. I think Ken first started sketching drawings of what he conceptually thought a torpedo should look like. And the original versions literally looked like a torpedo. So they were done with a about a 3-4 inch pipe of stainless steel. We shoved hops in them and sealed the ends and ran beer through them, and they failed miserably because we plugged the outlet for the torpedoes. And so we came up with this concept of the current today's Torpedo, which is has a cage within it that we stuff all the hops in. And so we'll run the beer through the bed of hops and then exit out and back up into the tank. Most of our fermenters now are designed with an inlet and an exit port. So we try to come off towards the bottom of the tank and then bring the beer, recirculate it through the torpedo and then back up a little bit higher above where the draw off arm is, so that we get a nice circulation of the hops. Within this beer, we start circulating the beer through the bed of hops when the beer is still in its late stages of fermentation, so it's still at fermentation temperature. And then we start to, once we get our gravity where we need it, we start chilling it down, and we continually run it for about 48 hours through this bed of hops as the tank's chilling down. And what we found is we extract different oils at different temperatures, or different flavors from those oils at different temperatures. Is that accurate? Well, I know it's accurate. I'll let Ken.
Say you're
if I
talking to the
missed,
wrong.
if I missed anything, Ken will tell me.
So between the new technology and then that you guys kind of created for that, and that dry hop and that swing in temperatures, this it's an interesting mix of hops. And I noticed when you guys published this online, you guys actually recommend using a Randall for serving, like as a potential means of kind of simulating that at the homebrew level. Is that right? I mean,
yeah, on a homebrew scale, that's pretty much the closest you're going to get to actually doing this. One of the things you'll note in here is Magnum Hops, which are historically a bittering hop. What we found is if we add a little bit to the Torpedo, it kind of adds a resinous mouthfeel to the beer, and really kind of comes through kind of some chewiness. That hop resin definitely coats your mouth. This is a very, what I would call, old school West Coast style IPA. It's definitely a lot different than what today's IPAs would be. So what I kind of say, it's very aggressive on your palate, but that's what it's about. And that's I talked about Celebration Ale. To expand Celebration, we knew we had to make more beer, and so we were doing original tests with the Torpedo using a Celebration recipe. And it got so much love across the country. We were doing it. We did one back in those days. That was probably I don't know, the late 90s, probably 96, 97, and we couldn't afford to test out 200 barrels of beer and just dump it. So we came up with well, how are we going to sell it in the middle of the summer? All right, we'll call it Torpedo Extra IPA. And then it got so much love and people were asking for it that that's when we went to the drawing board and said, okay, we need to tweak the recipe a little bit compared to Celebration Ale. And it's quite different than Celebration Ale. Celebration is, Cascade, Chinook, Cascade and Centennials, which none of those are in this beer. And one of the nice ones in this beer is that was when we were starting to experiment with Citra Hops, which was an experimental variety of hop back in the day, and it's turned out to be maybe one of the most popular IPAs, hops on the market today. So I think I just added Ken.
The Torpedo technology is really very impressive. I remember being in a brewery which will not be named, 10 years ago. not Sierra Nevada, another one, and they were into heavily dry hopping. And what they did was they raided stores for ladies' pantyhose, and they filled the pantyhose with hops and then tied them up and submerged them in the beer. So there are different ways of keeping your hops and the beer apart but in contact. But it's not an approach that I don't believe, Terence, that has ever been tried with.
No, I don't think we ever did that. We had a lady that, and she still sews all of our hop sacks that we use. She worked in the pub, and that was her side job. She would make hop sacks for us, the traditional kind of cheesecloth style. And she found a material that worked great. And she would charge us X number of dollars per bag. And that was her Christmas money. That was, she would buy gifts for her entire family on the number of hop bags we bought. So as celebration got more and more popular, the gifts got bigger and bigger.
I
And
first
she
came
just
to David.
retired after how many years? 29 or 30
I
years?
think she was your first, well, first or second. I know she started when the pub opened up, and she lasted right a year ago now. Actually, a year ago now. So what is that? 89
just
to
about 30 years.
Yep,
31 years. Yep.
Yep.
When I first came to David's, I was lecturing, and I said, these big sacks of hops in England, we call them hop pockets. And everybody started laughing. I had no idea what the hell people were laughing at. I'd never heard of a hot pocket. I still have never eaten a hot pocket, but I don't think that word is ever used in this country, but we call them pockets of hops in the UK.
We used to call them tubies because they look like a giant tube. I wish I had a picture.
I love it. I love it. We had a question from the crowd about the recipe. So it talks about for torpedo, it's a step mash. How long are the rests at those temps? Like, is it kind of a ballpark, 15, 30? What do you
Bring the recipe up again, if you could.
Will do.
Typical batch sizes are based off of 200 barrels. Most of our packaging runs, we call them 200 barrel runs. So we're torpedo, we're probably brewing 800 barrels worth at a time. So out of our 800 barrel fermenters. Hold on, let me get rid of the chat here. 148 is kind of coming out of the mill, and then we're hitting, by the time the mash tun's full, we're hitting 155 and resting 155. And that's kind of the same as the Paleo. That'll kind of vary based off of seasonality, grain coming in, and what kind of extract we're getting from the grain. So those will all vary
and also the ambient temperatures. So
yep.
the temperature of the malt coming into the process does also have an effect. So during the summer versus during the winter, you may need to adjust a few degrees just because of the chilling effect of really cold malt coming out of a silo versus 100-degree day where the malt might be 80 degrees in the silo.
Yep. Yeah,
it makes such a difference.
Yeah, one of the cool things that we early on adopters of as I said, quality and quality standards, and we have a gentleman on our brewing team that it kind of self-trained, built a database for ourselves, and we monitor fermentations and temperatures and things of that nature, so we can actually act pretty quickly to adjust temperatures. Obviously, at our size, we're doing a lot of blending, so that really helps to be able to look at that data and make fine-tune adjustments on mash temperatures so that we're hitting our final gravities and ABV.
Right on.
I think the gentleman Terence is referring to actually has a degree in brewing for Weinsteffen, and it turned out that Germans don't know how to brew top fermented ales very well. So his training was all about brewing lager beers. And when he came to us and he said, "You're doing it all wrong," and tried to make some changes, he soon realized that not all brewing is the same.
Yes, yes.
I like that. I like that. That's a good one. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions about Torpedo? Any questions, comments, concerns? Throw them in the chat here. Otherwise, I think it might be time for Big Little Thing. Oh, I see people,
Okay, good one.
people rushing. I think it might be time.
Well, while you're pouring that beer, I'll tell you another story. I might have told you this last time, but you know, this beer's quite bitter. Back in the day, I was in Birmingham, England. There's a brewery there called Beatham's, and I was visiting the brewery, and the owner, Tim Batham, said, "Would you like a beer?" Which is a pretty strange question. I said, "Yeah, I'd like a beer," and I tasted it, and I said, "It's quite bitter." In relative English terms, it was quite bitter. He said, "Well, the last time we measured," I said, "What's the bitterness? What's the IBU?" He said, "The last time we measured it, it was 45. I said, "When did you last measure it?" He said, 1945. So you know, it's if you know your brewery, you know your utilization, you know your, you know, how much bitterness is going to be able to recover. You can get pretty close to the bitterness you want to get, but yeah, it's and of course is committed to whole cone hops because you know, considered the best way of hopping, even though the utilization, of course, is substantially less than you're going to get with other forms of hopping. The commitment is to using hops as native a form as possible.
I'll add to that story of Charlie's, a story that came from somebody who Charlie, I think, knows fairly well, Doug Molman. I went and visited him when he was the brewmaster of the Los Angeles brewery before he moved on and moved up in the Anheuser-Busch organization. And he told me that between them and the other two big brewers at the time, Coors and Miller, who were separate at the time, he says, we all watch each other's bitterness units. And every year somebody drops a half a BU or 1 BU, and then the next brewer does, and the next brewer does. And they all followed them down to a point where I think, I don't know, 8 or 9 bitterness units at one point, I think, was sort of the average for American lager beer. And then I think they got to a point where, well, that wasn't maybe quite enough hops. So it reversed a little bit, but I don't know what the numbers are today. I haven't looked lately, but probably closer to 10 or 12, but still quite low compared to where craft is.
I don't think he pronounced his name correctly, did he, Charlie?
Doug Molman, yeah, I think so. I mean,
No, I know, but I love the way you say it. Molman.
Oh. It's interesting, you know, how people monitoring one another's beer. We used to do that in Bass, you know, and I remember we monitored one of the beers that's just been mentioned from a very large brewing company, and we noticed how over a 12-month period they raised the pH of the beer. They raised it, went up from around 4 right the way up to 4.5, presumably to take away a slightly sort of sour, acidy, sort of tangy nature and smooth it out a little bit. Anyway, we're getting off topic now.
So I was actually gonna, since you brought up Doug Molman, I'm gonna tell my Budweiser story of the time I was in San Francisco and I was going to a concert, and I walk into a bar right around the corner from where the concert is, and of course they don't have any pale ale, so I decided I'm gonna have a Budweiser before I walk in the door, and it was the greatest Budweiser I ever had, and I knew the brewmaster at that time, and I called him up and I said, I'm having a Budweiser in San Francisco, and it's the hoppiest Budweiser I've ever had in my life. It was like maybe 1996, right around that time. And he said, "Oh, you got that one batch that we double hopped it, and it's 17 and a half IBUs." So there you go. It was great. All right, so there was a question on atomic torpedo. So that's a new variation of our torpedo. More kind of east meets west is what we're going with that. Lower IBU than torpedo. Percent alcohol more. It's very smooth drinking. So be careful with it. I'll just say that. If you do run into it, it's quite good.
Yeah, I'll have to try and find that. So I poured Big Little Thing, which I had thought was a hazy beer, but I'm looking at it and it's not so hazy.
No, and I forgot to tell you that the other day. It is not hazy. It's within. So we created a brand family called Little Things brand family, and so a lot of people think anything that comes out through that brand is hazy because the original beer was a hazy IPA, but this is not intended to be hazy.
You succeeded. I mean, I was just surprised to see the pour. I was like, oh, okay, here we go. So tell us a little bit about this beer. What was the inspiration for it? I mean, this is a big one. I mean, this is a 9%er. What happened here? How did we?
Yeah, this was a beer that we were definitely going into the commercial version of a triple IPA, year-round version. Make it drinkable, and that's kind of a weird concept when you talk about 9% ABV. But that was the idea behind it. So lowering the bitterness on it quite a bit. We do use a huge portion of those other hop products that Ken spoke of, using lupulin powder in this. It's very heavy. We have some bittering hops that we add right at the beginning of the kettle boil, and then we wait until the very back end of it. We're also adding cane sugar, some organic cane sugar at the end to get the gravity to where we want it, and then letting it ferment out. Should we dive into this beer before questions? Because I did see some questions come in. I mean, recipe-wise.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it
Only
up.
in cans, yes. Only in cans. It does come in 19.2s. This is not in 16 ounces, right, Ken? I don't believe so.
So the recipe we have here,
Yep.
2-row, a little bit of wheat, a little bit of Munich.
Yep.
Just to give it probably enough backbone to support the bitterness, to support the hops.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, we're doing that second edition is 80 minutes into the boil, and we're doing a 2-hour. Well, actually, not even a 2-hour boil. We're doing 90-minute. So a lot of that time frame is like literally, flame out, adding all the hops, getting them all mixed in, and then start going to the whirlpool. So.
And then you said you're using the other hop products in addition to regular hops. So you're saying lupulin powder. Use any of the extracts or?
Yeah. That's mainly on the dry hopping portion of this beer. No extracts, no. And this has 2 different hop additions. So we're adding a hop addition at warm. And then when we start crash chilling, we're adding the Columbus.
I like Columbus hops. That's CTZ is one of my favorites.
Yeah. And that adds kind of that mouthfeel to this beer too, as well. That kind of resinous character in the beer, in my opinion. That's where that's kind of coming from. And probably adds a little bit more body to it, other than just the wheat and the Munich.
Well, it's interesting. You love CTZ, so I don't know if you know. It's three different people who claim they own the same hop came together. There was a dispute over who actually bred the variety, and there's stories of people raiding each other's farms and digging up rootstock in the middle of the night, and there was lawsuits over CTZ, and it was considered the alpha hop back, I don't know, probably 20 years ago. That was America's answer to the real high alpha varieties being grown in Europe at the time. But it had no place in any brewer's aroma profile for most of its existence. It was considered just an extract hop, and never ended up being used as a aroma hop. Craft brewers have sort of changed that, because it's a very high oil, over 2% quite often, and quite pungent. So it's interesting. It's sort of been reinvigorated with craft brewers, and in today's world of high alpha hops, it's not a high alpha hop anymore, even though back then it was 15, 16, 17 Plato, or 17 alpha. Today there's 20 bales an acre, 20% alpha hops that are being grown that have supplanted that as sort of an American alpha variety. So it lost. I found a new audience for aroma.
Yeah, the running joke with us in our beer club is, when somebody says that they used Columbus, you'll always hear somebody say, "Oh, I prefer Tomahawk," or "I prefer Zeus." And it's just, it's just one of those bits where if you know, and it makes people laugh, people chuckle. So yeah, the story with CTZ in general is God, it's worthy of a podcast for sure. Worthy of its own 2-hour discussion.
Yeah. I knew all those players back when the lawsuits were happening, so it was sort of interesting to see that happen.
Well, it's fun to sit back and watch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd much rather watch it than be involved. That's for sure.
Yeah. So there was a question on our opinions on hazy beers and that beer trend. I'm gonna let Charlie start that one because I know Charlie's got an opinion on that one.
Yeah, life's never static, is it? Back in the day, I in my team at Bass in the UK, we were responsible for new product development. And if I'd suggested, hey, let's make a really hazy beer, I'd have been out of a job. I'd have been doing dog food or something, I think. And we were obsessed with beer clarity. I mean, draft Bass. We were obsessed with isinglass finings and getting the right performance and making sure it was bright, and yet they're tremendously successful. So I love the flavor. I'm an old man now, so I still am not. I still prefer to see bright beer, but hazy beer sells, and it sells very well. But all I would say is it's harder to make a consistently hazy beer than it is to make a consistently bright beer. The haze tends to settle out, and you've got to be careful. So we spend a lot of time making sure that it is consistently hazy. I might have told you this story before. Again, I'm sorry about repeating myself, but in laboratories, in brewing laboratories, they have light boxes. So there's a shelf in the laboratory, and there's a light, bright light, strip light, and you put your beer on the shelf, and in front of the light there's a black line, and you put the beer on there, and you look, and what we used to do at Bass was look for the crisp edges in this black line, make sure it was really sparklingly bright. These days, with the hazy beers, you put your beer on there, and if you can see the line, it's failed. So it's another world these days, you know. But the flavor is fun. You know, these products, they got fantastic flavor. What I don't like is when people sort of tell stories and say, "Oh well, you know, they're better because if you filter a beer, you clarify a beer, you strip out the good stuff." No, you don't. You know, so it is a storyline. But it's a very successful one, and I, for one, would never have predicted it. Hazy Little Thing, for example, is a fantastic beer, and it's what sells, what people want, and then if they want a hazy beer, you got to make sure they get a hazy beer every time, consistently hazy.
And Charlie is our haze expert, so he heads our hazy task force, which his challenge was making sure that our beers stay properly hazy, which is the almost complete opposite of how he spent his whole career. But it's not as easy as you would think to make a consistently hazy beer batch to batch, and yeast generation to yeast generation, and malt crop to malt crop, and all that. A lot of very, very subtle things go into making a stable haze.
Well, I would say the only other thing I would say is that, you know, it's the biggest problem is when you've got beer on tap, because if you've got beer in a can, for example, when you pour it out, and of course I hope people do pour it out, you distribute the haze again. But if you have beer on tap and it settles out in a keg or something like that, then when you're pouring, then you might have a problem. So it's a particular problem for beer on tap.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll chime in because I love telling this story. They haven't heard this one, Charlie, but you've heard it every time we've given a talk. My favorite thing is Charlie and I are friends on one of these social media pages. And years ago, I think this is now going back about 3 years ago, he posted a picture of the same beer. One was filtered, one was unfiltered. He said, "Which one do you want?" And I'll go back to, you know, I went to UC Davis, and I'm would say I was educated on traditional brewing practices, but I'm right on that cusp. And when he presented that, I kind of looked at both beers, and I'm like, you know what? At the time, we were kind of just starting to play with Hazy Little Thing. We hadn't come out with it yet. I drink it weekly, if not daily. I love the beer. I love that little bit of sweetness. I love the mouthfeel. I love the aroma of it. I don't really, honestly, I don't pay attention, like when I'm at home and having a beer, I don't pay attention at the haze of it. When I'm at the bar, obviously I grab a beer and I'm kind of looking at it because that's just my job. But I remember looking at the photos that he had posted, and it was like night and day on who said which beer they would like. And I said, you know, 5 years ago, I'm going for the clear beer. I wouldn't even touch the hazy beer. Nowadays, I'm intrigued when I see a hazy beer. I want to know what it smells like, what the mouthfeel is like, all those kind of things. And so that's how it's changed my perspective of the beer. But I will say when you start getting into these, like where it's looking like orange juice and kind of the other stuff, I'm turned off by it. I'm not a fan of any kind of IPA that's made with lactose. It's just not the mouthfeel has gone over the top for me. So that's my opinion, which I express.
Yeah, the other guy who sent me some photographs, different photographs to the ones you're referring to, Terence, was Steve Parks of the American Brewers whatever the organization.
He's pretty vocal about that kind of stuff, isn't he?
Yeah, and he sent me 2 photos. He'd been out and about in Vermont, and he'd been in 2 bars, 2 beers, 2 glasses of beer, the same beer from 2 different bars. One of them was relatively bright, and the other one looked like chicken soup. And that's the problem. That is the problem, and I think that is the important message that a company like Sierra Nevada has, is you got to meet the customer expectation. It's about the definition of quality is delivering a product that the customer recognizes and expects. So that's the underlying ethos of a great brewing company.
I love it. I love it.
Ken, there was a question in there about why we use so much crystal hops. Maybe you can explain that a little bit. I know it's a hop
I guess.
been near and dear to us. So.
Yeah, I was enamored with that hop when I first smelled it out in the field before it had a name. I don't remember what number it was, but and then we created a beer around it called Crystal Wheat, where it was 100% crystal hops. And we were part of, I think, bringing that variety to market. And it's, I think, a very pleasantly aromatic, really nice hop. And we first started using it in Torpedo, I think, in a big way. But after we did Crystal Wheat, and there's not a lot of growers growing it, and most of it originally came out of Oregon. We had a couple of growers in Oregon we liked working with, and so sort of adopted it as a variety, and we bought a lot of it. And at this point, I don't know how many brewers, bigger craft brewers, are using it, but it's gone through its ups and downs. And I think right now they're actually planting some more acreage because we don't have enough to meet our needs. We had too much for a little bit because we had projected some bigger growth in Torpedo, but it's I think a very nice, pleasant, aromatic hop. It's got just really good.
Okay, there's another question here on carbonation, bottle conditioning, and I'll point this out. We look at cell counts, specifically 100 million cells per ml for bottle conditioning, and we try to achieve. What did you say, Ken?
I missed your.
The question was how the trick to bottle conditioning a beer and having such a small amount of yeast sediment and getting perfect carbonation. For us, it's very fresh yeast. So whatever we harvest today is usually going into bottle conditioning tomorrow morning, and then it will be used for fermentation after that. So trying to get the freshest yeast possible after harvest. And we usually shoot for roughly 1 million cells per ml, so that we're not over pitching. And then also too, we only try to achieve about a 2 Plato difference, or sorry, a 2.2 2/10 ABV increase on it. So we're adding enough sugar to get about a half to 3/4 volume of CO2 out of that fermentation. Maybe I gave them too many secrets, right?
Yeah, no, we typically handle our beer with about 2 volumes of CO2 in order to help keep oxygen low during all of the processing and handling. And then we target, Terence is right, we target a little over a half volume of CO2 increase in bottle conditioning. So we like to bring beer to our filler at 2 volumes or so, in order to allow fobbing at the filler and low oxygen in the headspace. And then we rely on the bottle conditioning to bring it up to 2.6 or 2.7 volumes.
Yeah, I'll add, sensory wise, We taste all of the beer starting at day 10. Usually they're fine at day 10. Sometimes in the winter time when our bottles are going to the filler and they're cold, it sometimes takes, 11, 12, maybe 13 days for that bottle conditioning process to take place. But we're tasting at day 10. And sometimes we'll get just a hair of diacetyl that kind of comes through because it hasn't quite carbonated all the way out. But we know it's going to go on a truck about 4 days later. So between 14 and 18 days, it's going to get on a truck out of our warehouse and head down the road. And we're confident at that time. But we do have holds in place. If we're diacetyl is just slightly higher than we want, we're going to taste it at day 11, day 12 to give final release, so that we know we're not sending anything out that's undercarbonated. We're also looking at CO2 content at that, but really sensory is the number one go no go bottom line for us. Tips on haze stability, I'll let Charlie chime in on that, but I would say oats, quality oats, wheat, quality wheat.
Well, it depends whether you're talking about haze stability as I historically knew it, which is preventing haze developing, or haze stability in terms of keeping it there. But obviously you've got to make sure you've got the right components and you're delivering a hazy product. But you've got to make sure it's stable and doesn't settle out. And I don't want to give away too many state secrets here on this one, but yeast quality is quite significant.
And we don't store our kegs upside down.
No. If I can segue slightly on the bottle conditioning front, we used to have a bottle conditioned beer in Basque called Worthington White Shield. And the difference between Worthington White Shield and, say, a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is that you virtually can't see the yeast at all in the Sierra Nevada, but we used to have, I don't know, about yay much sediment in the bottom of the White Shield. When I was a research manager in Burton back in the early 80s, we used to have the Worthington White Shield in the laboratory. And my colleague, Roy Parsons, would get his first beer at 10 o'clock every morning, his White Shield from the crate. And he'd come back to his place, and he'd take the top off, and he'd pour the beer really, really very, very carefully to make sure that the sediment stayed in the bottom. And just as the sediment was about to leave the bottom, he'd turn it upside down, and then he'd drink the yeast out of the bottle. And that was his B vitamins every day. And then he'd go down to the men's room for the next 20 minutes and read the newspaper and spend the rest of the time drinking Worthington White Shield. We didn't want the yeast because we wanted bright beer.
Charlie, what has happened to you? You said vitamin.
I did. Well, I've been around here for 22 years now, so I've learned to speak with this sort of bizarre. I also say beta glucan, but there we go.
That's good. Well, I'll let Ken say yes, yay or nay, but I heard stories of pale ale in the early 1980s having similar sediment content in the bottles.
Yeah, we had no filtration. We just relied on a cool room. It wasn't even cold. And we played around with findings, but we just gave up and had beers that sometimes have a quarter inch or a half inch, and that's where it was. And we didn't have any real control over it. We're very precise these days.
You didn't have mixers on the bright beer tanks back in those days, I know.
No, I don't even know. Yes, we had a dairy tank that was our bright beer tank.
And you got a question, why do you choose the brewery name Sierra Nevada?
My love of the mountains, and I spent a lot of time climbing in the Sierra Nevada, so it just seemed appropriate. And my daughter's named Sierra, who was born before the brewery.
So there was one hop flavored ice cream. I don't know if anybody's ever done that, but back in the day, I remember when we would do beer weeks in different cities, us and other breweries would team up with local ice creameries and make beer flavored ice creams. So that is a possibility.
It's all out there. It's all out there for sure.
Is there a common theme on the Little Things product line? The common theme is fun and enjoying beer. So that's about it. We have a current. My Little Thing was the second beer that we made, which was more of like a slightly sour beer. We used a little bit of a lactic fermentation that we added to it. Strawberry, hibiscus, and guava, and then Big Little Thing came next, and we just released a version called Sunny Little Thing that incorporates grapefruit and orange flavors in the beer. Is it going after a specific market? Can I say that, Ken? It's going after the kids today.
I'm going to have to check out here just in a minute here. Are there any more questions directed at me specifically?
I had one before everyone takes off here. So I wanted to do a quick plug of the book. I stumbled across this. And Ken, I just wanted to know how you went about writing the book. If you wrote it yourself, if you had it dictated to someone, how did the book come to be here?
It's a very long and tragic story. I wrote it myself, and I wrote it while I was building a brewery in North Carolina. My daughter was one of the editors, as was my assistant at the time. I would write for about once a month. I would spend a day and I would stream of consciousness, write about 100 pages. That book actually was like 500 pages when I first wrote it. And the editors were like, no way. And so a lot of it got whacked. But no, I did write it, and it was edited by my daughter, Sierra, and my assistant. Weak moment, I agreed to do it. I should probably redo it now that I have a little more time, but not much more time. But at this point now, that's probably my only book. And I'm not like Charlie. Charlie can write a book a week. I don't know how he does it, but he's quite prolific. But it was one of those things that I burned up once a month, the whole day, and wrote it, and then gave it to my daughter to edit.
Wonderful.
You know, people used to say to me, how many books what book should I read? I said, well, go to Amazon. There's a book on, look up Bamforth, and there's a book on beer, one on football and one on sexual morality. And I wrote two of them. And this guy said, well, you've never written a book on beer? These days I say, you know, you put in my name and there's lots of books there. But in all honesty, all of you, I recommend that first you should read that book, because if you really want inspiration, Beyond the Pale is a very inspirational book. And I'm not sure Ken would like me to say this, but if you really want a good argument for really thinking twice about whether to start a brewing company, you should just read the book, because there were a lot of challenges, you know, and it's an amazing book.
Yeah, I agree. You can find it on Amazon. I'll include the link here in the information that I'll send out at the end of the meeting. Ken, any advice for people last minute here? I mean, would you change anything with what you've done with the brewery, all of that?
That would take another like a 16-hour session to even start that topic. So yes, it is. There is an audiobook version, which I did not read, unfortunately. I offered to do it, and they found somebody else before I had a chance to say yes. But anyway, no, it's been a fascinating 40 plus years watching craft brewing change the way it's changed the whole beer industry, both in the U.S. and around the globe. And I think, you know, what we've done in America has really made its mark on the beer scene forever. You go to, I travel a lot and I go to a lot of countries and see the impact that the American brewing scene has had on beer culture, beer styles around the world. And it's pretty awesome.
I was visiting my mother recently, 101 years old, Northwest England, right across the road. I stepped out of her apartment, across the road into the shop, and there was a 6-pack of Sierra Nevada beer. Very nice.
Well done.
Pretty amazing.
Thank you all so much for having me, and you guys can keep going. It's time for me to check out, but I've appreciated it. Thank you so much.
No, we appreciate you, Ken. Thank you so much, and we'll start cheersing to you here in a minute with the Narwhal. So thanks again.
Cheers. See you, Ken.
Cheers, Ken.
All right, he hung up. I'll answer that one question. He's actually technically retired. He still owns the company, but he's technically retired. And as he told me a couple weeks ago in the pub, I'm working harder than I ever have. We got a new project going on, and he's deep in it. I think it's just what he loves doing. It keeps him going. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, let me just say a few words about that, because, you know, when I was teaching at UC Davis, I used to teach a class, Introduction to Beer and Brewing. I used to teach it 3 times a year, and Ken Grossman would come down to UC Davis, 100 miles away from Chico, 3 times a year would come and talk about his philosophy and his, you know, the business and how things grew and so on. And every time he came, every time there was something new that I'd never heard before, some new innovation. I mean, totally astonishing. I mean, thoroughly astonishing. I mean, it's an amazing.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Charlie, because you know, I just, you know, I feel we're open. We can talk to everybody here. It's pretty crazy. Like you don't meet people. I figure once in my life, I'll meet someone like Ken, and it's so inspirational, and it is, you know, he's changed my life. He's changed a lot of people at the brewery's life. He runs a great business and cares about his people. And he's down home person. You know, you said, well, what do you want to do? Like, one of the questions you put in there was like, what do you do outside of working? He loves to sail. He doesn't own a boat, but his friend does, and he loves to go down there and like sail in the Bay Area. He loves to fish. He loves to tinker. He wants to get into woodworking, all kinds of really great stuff. You know, he still drives the, you know, the same truck that he drove 15 years ago. He doesn't have fancy cars. He doesn't, you know, he's not that type of person. He's super down to earth, you know. Yeah,
I'll tell you a couple of stories just briefly. In Berkeley, there's the Torpedo Room, which is Sierra Nevada bar basically down in Berkeley. And when they first opened it, there was a problem with something behind the bar. And the journalist who was there, he writing in the local newspaper here, he said he went, and this guy in these work clothes went behind the bar and sorted it out. So I got talking to him, and I found out his name was Ken Grossman, and he'd sorted the problem out himself. I was in Mills River once, and there was a faucet not working in the men's room, and Ken's brother was putting his hands underneath it. It wasn't working, And he looked at me and he said, Kenny will sort it. You know, I mean, he's an amazingly hands-on guy. And I talked about going and tasting the beer the first time I went to Chico, and about how hoppy it was for me. But before then, I'd had a meeting with him, and the first thing he said to me was, Charlie, what do you think of electron spin resonance spectroscopy? I said, Ken, I can't even bloody spell it. I wouldn't buy it, but he did. Astonishing.
Yeah, the amount of, you know, he's going to go there when it comes to quality of his beer, and he's going to, you know, experiment, and he's going to buy stuff, and he's going to check it out, because if it's going to make his beer better, he's all about it. And I'll reiterate what Charlie just said is I have a meeting every Thursday when Ken can make it, and he's there 80% of the time. And it's every Thursday morning we have a new product development meeting, and so we're tasting like something that might be coming down the pipeline. We're discussing beers, and it's all the innovative brewers, and it's our VP of technical brewing, and all of us sit there, and I'm kind of the marketing person that gets to sit along and you know, taste the beers, because I understand our brand, and I understand kind of our core drinker. I might not know our future drinker, but you always know Ken's morning by how he's dressed. And when he comes in and he's in his blue jeans and they're greasy and dirty, and like literally he'll walk in and like, how'd the morning go? It's terrible, you know, like the water pump went out at the house, and I was up at 5 a.m. and trying to fix the water pump so that my wife could have a warm shower when she got up in the morning. You know, it's like, that's just how he is. He's that kind of person. So
I love it.
I think we have.
Let's move on into the last beer. The last beer was a choice. It was open choice. So if you have Narwhal, open a Narwhal. If you have Bigfoot, open a Bigfoot.
I've got both.
Well, how about both? Yeah, we could. You know, I don't know about mixing them, but go for one or the other.
Well, I'm not going to mix them, but I've gone for the Bigfoot first.
There we go. And I mean, we're
muted, Terence.
Shit, sorry. So I have a 2019 Narwhal 21 Bigfoot. I got a 22 Bigfoot.
Ooh, you got a big night in front of you then, my friend.
And normal. No, I'm not going to open them all.
By the way, just in case anybody, if I'll get a chance to say this again, if you ever look at the old Brewdog series, you'll find Sullivan and Bamforth as co-stars in a Brewdog episode sometime.
It was the best episode they ever made, and it was because of Charlie and I.
If we can associate ourselves with those naughty boys, then
we'll have to try and find that on a future episode here. We'll figure that out. So, I mean, we are looking to try and talk about both Bigfoot and Narwhal. Let me throw up the recipe for Narwhal. We'll kind of talk through it briefly, Terence and Charlie, if you don't mind. And then we'll jump right into Bigfoot. Let me pull that up here.
I'm going to open up my 19.
I like it. Sounds like a plan. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up here. So I had sent you a note where you guys have been brewing Bigfoot for a long time.
Yeah.
The club's been around for, like I said, this is our 31st year. And in the late 90s, one of our club founders, Marty Nacho, who's a beer author as well, actually wrote up an article about and did a group tasting of a vertical for Bigfoot. And they kind of found that at the end, after doing like a 6 or 7 year vertical, that the 2 to 3 year mark was kind of the sweet spot where everybody kind of was like, yes, those are the flavors. That's the profile we're looking for. Everybody was really pleased with that 2 to 3 year mark. And I really wanted to get your guys' take on that to kind of understand. And maybe that's what we do. Maybe we just jump into Bigfoot instead here, and we'll circle back to Narwhal. But just to kind of understand that the aging process for this and how this all kind of comes to be, because we've talked to other breweries as well that brew bigger beers, and they don't intend for their beers to be aged. There's one out of Michigan in particular that kind of said, no, we don't want you to age our beers. We hold on to the beers long enough so that way they're ready to be done when we sell them. But I'd be curious to get your guys' take on all of that.
Charlie, you want to go?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. It really is a difficult one. And perhaps I'll start it with a story. When I was still at UC Davis, Ken asked me to write a document for all the Sierra Nevada sales force about the importance of beer freshness. And because, as I've said already, it's such a big issue for Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. I wrote this document, and Ken got back to me and he said, I like it. He said, but you've missed something out. And I said, what's that? He said, some beers improve or can improve with aging. And he was, of course, thinking Bigfoot. And so I put that in. But I think Terence and Ken and I were involved in a vertical tasting online a year or two ago now. And it's a personal thing, you know, it's a personal opinion. In my opinion, I prefer Bigfoot or any other beer. I prefer it new, you know. And it's something that's not always entirely predictable, you know, the way in which a product will age. It's not an exact science. And I mean, I've been studying flavor, stability, and freshness for 30 years now. And I can't really point you towards a definitive study which says if you have a beer of this ABV, these characteristics, this is what its flavor, this is how its flavor is going to change over time. So there's a certain degree of romance about it, and it's a wonderful storyline, you know, vertical tastings and all of that. Is it predictable? I'm not convinced that it is. Is there a sweet spot? Does it get progressively linearly better as time goes by? I'm not sure we can answer those questions. It's a personal preference of what you like. And I think when I was involved in that tasting, and Terence will probably remember it better than I can, I think still my preference was for the younger beer. But again, you can do that with any beer basically. But you know, you could say, hey, come around to my place, I've got a Coors 1959 original, you know. But people tend not to do that, you know. So that's my take on it. It's not an exact science. Temperamentally, I like my beers relatively young.
Yeah, I'll add to that and say that my personal opinion over the years drinking this beer, and I got to be honest, I probably take home a couple 6-packs a year of this beer. I have access to all of our cellars, so I don't necessarily need to like feed my fridge in the garage. So I can grab as I need, but in my personal opinion, I like it fresh. I prefer it at about six months to about 18 months. That's my kind of, that's the wheelhouse as long as it's stored properly. The thing about it is, and I'm gonna say this, and this is like super kind of biased in my opinion this year, and I've actually discussed this with quite a few people at the brewery as the beers have come through sensory. For some reason, even though the IBUs are analyzing out the same. The bitterness is much more smoother in 2022 than I've ever remembered in my entire career at Sierra Nevada. And there's a couple people that are tasting at the same time that I've been tasting that agree. And one of them, I've been there coming on 28 years, and this guy's been there 33 years. And he's like, man, this is the maybe most drinkable in aspect to the bitterness, and because the bitterness can get on that harsh level where it's not necessarily pleasant. I would, that's just kind of an opinion, and like kind of how you feel. A lot of times we go to sensory and it's like your first beer of the day. You had coffee at like 8 a.m. and now you're sipping a beer at 8:30 without any food, and so it can be a little assertive on your palate. But this year's, for some reason, it's just got a smoothness to it. So I would say if you can get some 2022, definitely try it. As it ages, definitely you get different flavors, different nuances. I love doing verticals. I'm not, I like doing them just to see how the beer ages out. And every once in a while, like, 1 year I'll taste the six-year-old beer and it's great. And the next year, that next version is not as good. So it's a matter of opinion. I think this year's is pretty awesome. So
now I'm eager to try it. I can't wait till it hits our area here. I think it just got released at the start of the year. Is that about right?
Yeah, and I mentioned that earlier because I know some people have joined in, and you'll see a silver crown on there, and usually it's got the
year on it.
Usually has the year on it, and so when we opened up the boxes when they first came, they printed the wrong year on the label. And there's only one other difference was in, since I've been there, 2014, good story was, I don't know if I should say this, but we had someone that worked in our graphics department, and he liked to maybe go out to his car and smoke a couple bowls every once in a while. And anyways, he sent a mirror image of the graphics to our vendor, and so 2014 has a left foot on it, not a right foot on the crown. And so this is the first year in a while where we did a silver crown to start out the year, because they sent us 2021, and we don't want to relive that. So
I had to hunt around Davis to get it today.
Right.
Yeah. But I managed to get them. Thank God.
So is that a question on what year did they print it this year? Oh, 2021. Ken first started putting the year on it, I think, in maybe the 80s, late 80s, started having the crown. And those that remember when we had a twist off crown, we had a little graphics underneath the crown. But when we went to pry off, the liner on the inside wouldn't allow you to have a graphics underneath it. It wasn't thin enough. So anyways.
Terence mentioned the move to pry off from twist off. That's all to do with oxygen ingress.
Mm-hmm.
Much tighter seal with a pry off. So for any of the beers, that's much less oxygen ingress into the beer. And the other thing that a lot of people, I didn't realize this until relatively recently when Ken pointed out to me, was, I've always thought of this as a barley wine, but it was not allowed to be called a barley wine. It had to be called barley wine style. So if you look carefully at it, it's not a barley wine per se. It's a barley wine style beer, but it is a barley wine.
So, so barley wine wise, it looks like we have a heavy dose of Chinook and Cascade and Centennial. Looks like we're using the same stuff that we had laying around in all the other IPAs and stuff here, which always kind of cracks me up about seeing the bitterness levels to balance the malt in this style of beer. And still Cal Ale, still the same yeast. So that same Chico ale yeast has been in every beer so far, like, which is astounding to me that's the beer, you know, that yeast is as versatile as it is in all of these styles. I mean, it's no wonder that it's the home brewer go-to, you know, whether it's 1056 or SO5 or BRY 97 or 001 or whatever anybody calls it. Like, just amazing. You know, Chico, very, very versatile yeast.
Yeah, I'll say this, that that is a very hardy yeast. This is one of the beers that takes it to its limit. And this is bottle conditioned. And we, generally speaking, we will usually taste this at day 10 and a lot of times push it to day 12 or further. To make sure it's all the diacetyl has been removed and we have proper carbonation. It does retard the fermentation slightly. So the alcohol, I would say.
And so ABV wise, that's what did I see on that? 9.8?
9.8, yep.
So less than 10%. So it's less than a lot of the imperial stouts and things that are out there on the market, which is interesting to me as well. Usually I think barley wine's usually even more so, but it's slightly less.
Yeah, I think hop wise and all that kind of stuff. I think I see a question in there. Why isn't it a barley wine? Not sure what that is. IBUs measured on this are usually between 95 and 100, 98-ish. And that's about the max you can measure. Or it is the max.
It is the max, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, people who claim that this relates to the story I told earlier on about the guy who, you know, last time they measured it was 1945. You know, you can put in some hops, you can calculate, you know, you can say, well, we'll put in this amount of hops, we'll do this, and we'll get, you know, 300 IBU. Well, you won't, because the bitter substances just aren't that soluble. So you literally can't go above 100. It's just not going to happen. So this is, years ago we had at UC Davis, we had a competition took place, and they filmed it for the Brewing Network, Homebrew Competition, and the challenge was to make a beer of 20 Plato and 100 IBU. And they boiled and boiled and boiled and boiled and boiled, and we were out there about 2 o'clock in the morning, and nobody made 100 IBU. It just, you know, it couldn't be done. So this is as high as you're going to get.
Yeah. So there's a question there: why barley wine style ale and not just barley wine? It's a great question. I've been asking that one for, I don't know, 20 years now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that question wasn't asked when Ken was on, because Ken does have the answer, and I can't remember what the answer was.
The government, it's a legal requirement, and I think it goes back a long time ago, because wine is in the name. It had to have style to it. It's just like you can't make a Scotch ale in America. You can make a Scotch style ale or a Scottish style ale. You can't make an Irish stout. You can make an Irish style.
Well, how the hell can you make an IPA then, an India Pale Ale?
I know. I don't know. I don't think they figured that part out. But it's
because they don't know what IPA stands for, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this one. Here's a good one. We make a beer every single year, and it's called Baltic Joy, and it's one of my favorites that we do because it came out of our beer camp program, and it was it's a Baltic Porter and those that are on here that are homebrewers know Baltic Porter is technically a lager and made with lager yeast. And it has local almonds, and I say almonds because that's what we call them here. They're not almonds, they're almonds. We shake the L out of the tree. And yeah, and so it has almonds and coconut in it. So it's based off of like, you know, Almond Joy.
Yeah.
And so Baltic Joy, we submitted the labels and we said lager brewed with almonds and coconut. And they came back and they said, no, it's a porter. You have to say ale brewed with, and we're like, no, it's not an ale. It's not made with ale yeast. It's made with lager yeast. And they go, no, porters are made with ale yeast. And we come back and we said, no, it's lager yeast. And they said, well, then you need to call it a porter brewed with almonds and coconut. So anyways.
Was this the state or was this
TTB, yeah. It's all right. I mean, you know, hey, they whatever. It's the way it is.
Every government institution with letters for a name is something else, man.
Yeah.
I swear.
So someone said wine versus beer licensing. Yes, they have better lobbyist. I think that's my opinion. I don't know if Charlie agrees, but they generally do. They have more political dollars behind them. Because
I really don't want to get into the arguments on the relative merits of wine and beer. But
yeah,
I wrote the book. So there we go.
Oh, there you go. There's another Charlie book there.
No one. Grape versus grain, a completely unbiased comparison of wine and beer. There you go.
Yeah, and I will say that they have a wine has done an amazing job over the years, and they have some dollars behind them. So
one last story. I got to go in a minute as well, but just one last story. I was showing a bunch of people around the brewery at UC Davis a number of years ago, and I was doing my usual thing of having to go at the wine guys and celebrating beer. And this guy, the only guy in my life who really took issue with me, and he was really livid, he was really angry. He said, how dare you rubbish wine and celebrate beer? I said, what are you talking about? And the point he made was that years ago, the wine guys, when they were celebrating wine and health, they approached August Bush III and said, would you join us in promoting alcohol in moderation? And he refused to do it. And got very, and so this guy got very upset. He said, you know, you guys are not prepared to actually sort of stand up and challenge the anti-alcohol lobby. So the wine guys, they have stolen that moral high ground, but you know, we can to celebrate beer.
Tell them what Robert Mondavi told you.
Robert Mondavi, I mean, the number of people say to me, you know, it takes a lot of great beer to make good wine. But I said, look, I heard that from Robert Mondavi. I can take it from him. I can't take it from anybody else. Yeah.
Love it.
This has been fun.
That has. It's been great.
Always a pleasure to have you on, Charles. We thank you so much for coming on.
And my elder brother, Terence, here as well.
I don't think you're going to live that beard down, Terence. I'm just
You know, Terence has got really hairy toes. I mean, he looks like the bloody Hobbit. You know?
I sent Charlie a picture one time when we were on the coast of California, and it was just my feet with the ocean behind it. And he's like, oh my God, Hobbit toes. So that's where that comes from. So,
yeah, so anyway, we're good pals. So it's good. It's been nice to be with you. So thanks.
Yeah, I'll stay on for a few minutes if
I'm
You
going to
guys are
go.
cool?
If that's okay by everybody.
Yeah.
No, we understand and we appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks a lot. Cheers,
Thank you.
everybody.
Charlie.
Take care.
All
Peace.
right. Bye-bye. Buy my book on the latest book is all about soccer. It's the autobiography of a famous American soccer personality, big in England as well. So
Yeah, and as Brett said, safe travels.
all right.
Okay.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Love you.
All right.
Bye.
Take care, our friend.
All right. So I saw there was a note in there on what is Narwhal barrel aged in. It's been barrel aged in a bunch of different stuff, but if you have barrel aged Narwhal, that is in bourbon. No specific brand of bourbon. It's literally, Heaven Hill is probably majority of the barrels, but it's give or take a bunch of different bourbons. So is there anyone in here that is within our DTC states, so direct to consumer states? Because I think there was a couple questions on like shopping for our beers. There is, and I'm not trying to sell or like whatever you.
Please sell to us. We are looking for.
I know, but I'm not into that shit. You know what I mean? It's like that's not my gig. I just like to talk about our brand because I believe in it and I think it's fucking awesome and all those kind of things. So we just added Pennsylvania. So if there's anyone from PA, no, Indiana's not in there, but I'll read them off. It's California, DC, Kentucky, North Carolina, North Dakota. Is there anyone live in North Dakota? Okay.
Not on this.
I know. Nebraska, New Hampshire, Ohio, Virginia, and Vermont are our states. But anyways, you can buy a Bigfoot vertical, and right now we have $35 for a 12-pack, and it consists of 21. Consists of 2011, 14, 16, and 21. So I guess 21 was in there, but anyways.
I like it. So we talked about everything except we didn't get a chance to really touch on Narwhal. Let me jump to Narwhal real quick. Just pick your brain for a couple of minutes. We'll end up sending the recipes to everyone here, so I won't waste everyone's bandwidth on that. But we basically have.
That's a great beer, by the way.
It is. It's wonderful. The version I have here is barrel aged. It was packaged in 2020, so I'm assuming it was brewed in 2019. I'm assuming it sat for a while.
It's at least a year. Is probably 2018. So it's at least a year in bourbon barrels, and depending on it, it's anywhere from 10 to 14 months, 16 months, somewhere in there. So
yeah, just a wonderful beer to have. I wish let me put it this way. I split the 4-pack with 3 other individuals here, and I'm kind of wishing I didn't at this point. It's that good.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yep.
So the beer overall looks to be, a little bit of honey malt, a little bit of chocolate malt, some Carafa 3. So that's the dehusked Carafa, and smoked barley, which I was a little surprised to see. So you got a little bit of
Yep.
Just a little bit of smoke there. And it's a big beer, but no sugar addition, but you're shooting 1096, almost 1100 specific gravity. And what was really fascinating to me, I see here you do add some sucrose there. It's a long boil, but you actually add Mandarina Bavaria hops. It says it's 0. Is that your at flame out, or is that your start of the boil?
The start of the boil. Anything at the top on all those recipes are at start of boil.
Okay, so I mean, Mandarina, Bavaria. I mean, it's a decent alpha size, but like, I mean, that's a very citrus forward hop for such a a malt forward beer. Like, what was I mean, do you know what the inspiration was behind that? Like, how Ken kind of came up with that, or was that somebody else? How did that come to be?
I think we probably had extra of it, and we needed to find a home for it.
You almost made me spit
No,
that.
yeah, no joke. No joke. That does happen in breweries our size. It's probably lost all its flavors and everything else with it, but maybe it does impart something in there, and that's what we do.
No, it's yeah, like I said, I can't complain about this beer. That's a wonderful thing to have that beer and to finish off the night like this. It's wonderful, wonderful day.
Yeah, someone was
Can't
asking
complain.
about the blending and how we do the blending. Generally speaking, like we bring, so we have a barrel room that's about 3 miles off site. So we have a warehouse for all of our barrel age, and we control it. It's like 55 degrees at the barrel room, and we bring bulk beer there. So we have these crates, roughly 300-gallon crates. Fill those up, bring them out there, and we fill the barrels, and then we age for the year plus. And then we bring the barrels back, and then we stage. So we transfer now on the same truck, open barrels. So we drive down the road very carefully, and we bring them to the brewery, offload them. And when we get them on the dock, our blending team will taste through them, and we'll usually get, I'm there sometimes, not always, but there's a group of about 4 people that walk through and taste every single barrel, and we're kind of tasting for our quality preference. We will X out barrels, and if we X out barrels, we actually take them back to the barrel room, because we found over the years, sometimes, sure, if we get one that's like completely sour, which with Narwhal and Bigfoot, those kind of things are very rare, just because the meat of the beer itself will kind of inhibit any kind of bacterial growth, or other than Brettanomyces, which we don't have in our barrel room, but they'll X out the ones that maybe have questionable flavor profiles, and we'll take them back to the barrel room, isolate them, put them over in a corner, look at them, 6 months, a year later. But generally speaking, they're going to mark off all the barrels that, okay, all right, these are going into the tank. Next day, they bring another set of barrels, taste through those, pump those back into the tank until we have 200 barrels worth of beer. And then we go. This is one thing, we've never pasteurized beer. When we started doing a lot of barrel aged beers, we started pasteurizing, just because when we get to our pilot line filler, we want to ensure that we got all the bugs out of it. So our barrel aged beers do get pasteurized when we're doing large productions. If we're doing a very small limited release production, we have a couple hand fillers, or little small, like not Maheen fillers, but similar to a Maheen filler, that we'll use for those kind of releases. But other than that, that's how our blending program goes for it. It's all off of sensory and tasting profile. So
Oh, it's all of this has been just absolutely wonderful tonight. We really appreciate your time, your energy, your efforts, all of this. You, Charlie, Ken as well. Especially, I know Ken going over to visit family and whatnot, still taking
yeah.
part of his day to talk to us here today. Just can't thank you guys enough for the effort. I do have to ask, as a home brewer, though, I miss my heritage bottles. As a home brewer, I kind of did home brewing, and I was a bottle conditioner, and like the go-to was always, it was like you either buy a Sam Adams, which I'll bleep that out in post here.
Oh, I don't care. No.
And then Sierra Nevada was the other one. And I love the Sierra Nevada bottle, the heritage style bottle, because the stubby bottle fits in the top dish rack. The label strip super easy. And I always wanted to ask, is that why? Is he allowing the home brewers, is there that much thought put into it? Is he allowing the home brewers to reuse his bottles so that way, we can get into the hobby? Because it's almost, like I said, I mean, every time I brewed a beer, it was like, okay, I'm going to buy 2 cases of, Sierra Nevada, and then I'm going to bottle this next batch. That was just how it always went.
I'm going to say yes, just so you buy more. But no, I'll tell you the reason behind the heritage bottle was he had tall neck bottles originally, right? Sierra Nevada was tall neck.
Okay.
Going all the way back, the tall neck bottles were beer back bottles. So I think I'm looking over the crowd that you have on site, and there's enough here that will remember barback bottles. And barback bottles came in these big, huge cardboard boxes, and it was Bud Miller Coors and all the, American beers. Ken couldn't afford bottles. He couldn't buy it. So in the early days, it was barback bottles. And then once we left Chico, we had to expand out and go to the Bay Area, he never got those bottles back. So it was right at the point when he started, was right whenever big brewers were now starting to have their own proprietary bottles. They were starting to kind of use recycled glass. That was all coming into play at that time. And so he was able to get Schlitz bottles and all that. There's a picture. I wish I would have sent it to you, because there's a picture of his warehouse, and it's like all the boxes are Schlitz, Bud, Coors, whatever, and they were all stacked up in there. And once he lost that, he had to find a means of I need a bottle. And so he went to Glass Supplier, which was probably OI at that time. I know it's OI, but he went to them and he said, okay, I want a bottle. And they're like, well, $100,000 for us to create a mold, and then you got to guarantee you're going to buy X number of bottles. He couldn't afford that. And he said, what do you got generic off the shelf? And they showed him the Anchor bottle. So that kind of, if you know what I'm talking about, the Anchor bottle's got that kind of very gradual curve up to the crown. Or we have this other thing called a heritage bottle. Well, no one was using the heritage bottle. And if I remember back in the, early 1980s, everybody used that Anchor bottle because everybody wanted to look the same as Anchor. And that was him and Paul and Steve Harrison. They're like, we got to differentiate ourselves from the competition, and let's go with heritage bottle. They were looking at the bottles and they're like, no one's using this. Let's use the heritage bottle. Let's go green label. Let's do that. Right. Completely different. Everybody had these tan labels and different colored labels and all that kind of stuff. So Ken hates marketing. What he didn't know was actually he was a pretty brilliant marketer early on, And so at that time, it was a crown finish, and he didn't have to pay anything. All he had to do was pay for the glass. And so that's what he did. And so that was the heritage bottle. That's where it all came from. So no, at that time, maybe it was a twist off early on, or it became a twist off. I don't know. I wasn't there at that time. When I started at Sierra, it was a twist off. So
Love it. I love it. Sierra Nevada has been a classic. It's a staple, and I would dare say it's almost taken for granted in the craft beer community, because it's been around for so long, and it took me reading Ken's book to kind of go back and really like realize how much of a trailblazer Sierra Nevada really was back in the early 80s into the 90s. Like, I mean, just insane that he had to explain how hop flavor works in a beer to people to get them to serve it. Just mind-blowing to me, like I said, so much stuff that we as the homebrewing community and as craft beer fans take for granted now. Just absolutely astonishing. And like I said, I couldn't be more grateful for a brewery like Sierra Nevada and a guy like Ken Grossman who can do those types of things, and still be around to enjoy it here 30 plus years later,
well,
just wonderful.
I mean, Dan just said it. He said Sierra Nevada literally got me into beer. It got me into beer too. It was like I had that beer in the parking lot at a Grateful Dead show. I had no idea I was going to get into this industry. I hadn't even graduated from high school. Oh, wait, I'm not supposed to say that. I was drinking underage. And
I think we're past the limit here. We're okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
And I, and back then, like going to Grateful Dead shows, that was my big thing, was like, okay, get a 6-pack, go, because they would sell them for $2 in the parking lot. Like, all right, I got $12, go buy a 6-pack. And that would last me for like, and not that I was like drinking regularly, but it was just like something to have, right? And it was great, and blah blah blah. And so, anyways, I would always like buy a 6-pack, and we would go home and like party, before it was bedtime, before we went to the next show the next day. But that was one of the things, is like it really inspired, like silently inspired me. And then there became this day where I was like, all right, I got to go and build my future and do something. And so I went to UC Davis, and I got lost, I was partying a lot, and obviously, but I got accepted to UC Davis, and I was taking environmental planning was my major. And I took my first government bureaucracy class, and I'm like, God, this is fucking terribly boring. And that summer, so I'll just tell my history. That summer, I went up to visit my brother, who was he was tending a pot grower's property while he was out growing. The owner of the property was out growing pot on some other property in Southern Oregon. And so I stayed at this guy's house, and it was like this big yurt, and we had a pond with trout, and you catch salmon, and you catch salmon and eat those at night. And my brother had got a part-time job for Rogue Brewery in Ashland, Oregon, and he was brewing for him. And I'd go down there and like all the beer you can drink. And he's like, yeah, but you got to help me clean kegs. And so I was like, not even employed, but I was doing work there. And I'm like, my friend's a fermentation science major at UC Davis, and he wants to brew beer. So I went back to school, and I went and, hey, can I change my major? Sure. Right on. And so that's whenever I got into it. And then that's whenever I started discovering Sierra Nevada. And I remember the last 2 years of my education I was such a fan. I would drive up to the brewery. I had a fake ID. Well, at that time I was 21. But before that I had a fake ID. And if anybody knows Steve Dressler, our retired brewmaster, his wife was a tour guide, and that's the first time I got a tour from her while she was pregnant, and pregnant with her daughter, who we're all friends now. She's 29 years old or 30 years old. And
It's a small world, right?
Yeah, and so anyways, and his kid was born, his son was born right before I started working there. But it was this whole thing, you know, I was like all about Sierra Nevada. And so whenever I graduated from school, I wanted to work Sierra Nevada, Anchor Steam. Those were my two beers because I was a California boy. I wanted to stay home. And I found out that Anchor wouldn't hire anyone with a brewing education because Fritz Maytag didn't want anyone to come in to tell him how he should make beer, and which is, hey, he owned the brewery; it's his deal, right? And so at that time, I was focused on Sierra. And I go to we'd visit Sierra Nevada, and I wear my gear, and they're just like, all my friends were like, "You're such a kiss ass." But I got the job. I'm here. I'm 28 years. I can retire and live a great life, and all because of Ken, and all because of what Sierra Nevada has given me. So
Say nothing wrong with being a company man at this point, man.
Right? Yeah, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool shit. So
I agree. All right, man. So cheers to you. Cheers to 28 plus years here at Sierra Nevada, and hopefully many more. This was a wonderful evening. Really appreciate the time. Really appreciate yours, Ken's, obviously, Charlie's as well. All of your input. And the recipes, God, man, that's awesome. Like just being able to share that, we'll probably putz around with that for the next year, trying to work on that with club projects. I think that'll be really, really fun to work with. So I really appreciate the love for homebrewing on that front.
Yep.
Thank you so much for that.
Well, it's our roots. So I mean, that was me. You know, I was homebrewing before I started working at Sierra. So that's what it's all about.
Indeed.
Right.
Indeed.
I might get back into it once I retire.
There you go.
Right on.
Well, if you do, I know a club in Illinois that does meetings.
So where are you guys located in Illinois?
So we're I'm about an hour and a half south of Chicago, but we have a pretty wide swath within Illinois here. We're Chicago area bound, but it's everywhere. And the other clubs that we've invited here poach on our turf, so to speak. They'll all get mad at me for that, but I don't care.
Right.
And no.
So I have Illinois in my roots, you know.
Is that right? Yeah. Where are you from originally?
Well, I never lived there, but my father was born and raised in Peoria, Illinois.
Hey, there we go.
So Caterpillar tractor.
Yeah.
Grandma worked there. Grandma worked there. All my aunts, uncles, great aunts. Yep. So that's might get back there this summer.
Well, there we go. Well, if you come out, we got a couple of pro brewers here in the circuit as well. We'd treat you like a king.
All right. Let's talk about it, because my nephew is going to compete in the disc golf championships that are happening in Peoria, Illinois. So he's a stick. I don't know. Do you say stick whenever they're disc golfers? I don't think so. I don't know. Whatever you call them then. I don't know. Tossers. He's a tosser. Wait, that sounds weird. Okay.
Yeah, I think Charlie would have concerns if you said that in front of him. So, but no, definitely. When you're ready to come out, you say the word between UKG, JBG, Chaos, and us. We'll take care of you, my friend.
Right on.
Definitely. All right.
Peace, everyone. Take care.
Good night, sir.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right.